the questions that you ask the agent is going to affect the quality of the thing that you get out.
This is Michael Bolin, tech lead for the open source Codex repository and former distinguished engineer at Meta, and we talked about how his career grew.
So I was like, all right, hackathon, totally gonna like make a new build system. You know, relatively quickly had something that was dramatically better, like at least like twice as fast.
He shared about how OpenAI engineers actually use Codex.
I almost feel a little bad writing code by hand.
What percent of your code would you say is human written?
Yeah, because every time I sit down, I'm like, should I write this? I mean, the answer is almost always no.
And we discussed AI research versus big tech engineering cultures.
What are your thoughts on that research-led culture versus engineering-led culture?
I mean, it's certainly an adjustment, right? I think if anyone who comes here and says otherwise is a liar. But
here's the full episode.
I was looking deep into your website and there was something, most everything I could find more information about, but there's this one thing that you seem to be pretty excited about at the time, but I couldn't find any information about it because all the links were dead. What is Chickenfoot?
oh man, that's strangely relevant because it was my master's thesis project. It was a Firefox extension, probably one of the very few that was written, in JavaScript for Firefox as a thesis project. And it was actually a little coding tool in a sidebar Firefox, and it was like a little REPL. It was called end user. The idea was end user programming for the web. And so there were functions like enter and click and things like that. And you'd say enter and you'd have pass a string arg and it would like find the box, and you'd say click search or whatever. And a lot of the work was all these heuristics that we built under the hood that if you said, enter first name, finding the words first and name and finding the text box that was closest, and then like using that, and then through JavaScript, like using that as the input. And I just think about that now because it's really funny. We did a lot of work, and that's, a lot of what these agents are doing right now, right? Is like similar, but now actually truly in natural language, like not in this little like JavaScript REPL.
Oh, interesting. So it parsed the front end and had this REPL where you could say, I don't know, find the first name field and,
Yeah, we'd use like the accessibility tags and alt text for images, and we'd, and it worked well. It was really good at Craigslist actually, because that's one of the simplest websites you could use. But I had friends who like made like automated tasks and like made real money off of things they automated with this tool, which is really fun.
When you entered the industry, you were really excited about going to Google and specifically working on Google Calendar.
Yeah.
So what drew you to Google and what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, so I, got online in the 90s, right? I remember, browsing the web, and it was at a time you'd go to you try 5 different search engines to like hopefully find the thing that you wanted. And it's funny because I distinctly remember my roommate in March of 2000 saying like, hey, there's this site, this search engine that looks a little bit better. I think it was still stanford.google.edu. And I was like, oh, this is better. And and then you started reading, and they were just so different, right? Yahoo was all like very cluttered, and like they tried to be very sparse and were more, I think, principled about it at that time. And then, like a lot of things, you start seeing people who gets a job there, and you're like, oh man, they're taking really good people. Like I want to work with those people. And I felt like they just, really got the web, like especially at that time when like Microsoft didn't. Around that time, Microsoft killed the Internet Explorer project altogether, and I was like, this is the portal into the web, and you guys are dismantling it. Whereas Google was way more web forward. And so between that and like the quality of engineering and the impact they were having, is certainly a place that I was really excited to go to coming out of school.
And what was the culture like there at the time? Like, I think in some of your writing, you talked about like product versus infrastructure.
A lot of companies, especially ones that get big like that, it's kind of like whatever they were good at first is, I feel like the founders always have a soft spot for, right? So certainly information retrieval and infrastructure, right, were like key to growing that company. And whereas I was drawn there at the time because they put out things like Gmail, right, which were vague, right, but it didn't it still, I think, didn't have the same cachet inside the company, right, as search and that sort of thing. And so, when I was working on it, Calendar, it was still like mostly consumer. It was like it was also sold to enterprises, right? But like we were not the ones making the money. Like we were probably a cost center, right? At that point in time.
I saw eventually you ended up leaving Google, and I mean, from your post, it looks like it was pretty bittersweet. So what left you to leaving Google?
I had been there for 4 years. And I mean, realistically, like investing was a thing. Like finances definitely changed after that 4 year period ended. But also it was just tough. Like I had I guess a bad habit at that point of working really hard on things that like really were important to me, but maybe weren't important to Google, right? So like I worked on Calendar, that was pretty important. And then I worked on Google Tasks, which was like a very small feature within Calendar, right? It's like probably at least 2 to 3 orders of magnitude fewer users, right? But I was really passionate about it. And then I was really passionate about the JavaScript infra and the 𝗧𝗶𝗺𝗀𝘀, that suite of JavaScript tools. And it's great. I mean, I enjoyed and I'm proud of all the effort that I put into the things. That I went and wrote the book on Clojure because I was so motivated, but career-wise, maybe not the best move, right? You're like, "Oh, but I'm doing all this high quality stuff," and you see other people getting recognized. You're like, "But I'm working so hard," like that's kind of like the harder, not smarter type of mistake. And so, it's kind of like I should go somewhere or try something else and see if like the things that I'm excited about are the things that like the company I'm working at is most excited about.
Later, you came back into big tech and you started working at Facebook. I understand that you were kind of like a JavaScript expert at the time. And then one of your first big projects at Meta was kind of build tooling in the Android code base. So I want to know the story behind how you got involved in that.
So at the time, it was like Facebook's going to make a phone, right? Actually, there were some failed projects, but it was like this time it's really going to happen. We're going to partner with HTC. We're going to like fork Android and do some stuff. And so that seemed super exciting, right? As a person, just coming into the company. And I I'd done like quite a bit of Java. I was more JavaScript. But at this point, this is also where they called it FaceWeb, the version of like they kind of like put HTML5 Facebook on the phone, and like that was clearly not working. And it was clear that like mobile was going to be the future. That was kind of make or break for the company. And suddenly, a friend was like, "Hey, like I know you really like JavaScript, but like you should really pick Java or Objective-C and like get good at this if you want to be a product person." And that was really, really great advice. And so I was like, "Well, I like Java, I don't like Objective-C, so like let's go." And so that's how I found myself on that project. And I we had a very short timeline because unlike almost every other project, there was a hard deadline. Usually, you ship when it's ready. This was like, nope, we got to send a bill to HTC because they're going to like burn it into phones on like March 1st or whatever it was. So, it was really a scramble. And the original Android code base or a bunch of it was also like inherited from a contractor that Google paid. Like it's like Facebook didn't want to make like a native app, and they paid some guy, and then it was like the app in the store, and they're like, "Here, the code's yours now." And we should have thrown it away, but we didn't. And so a lot of things they're frustrating, but also like iteration time, right? I think for everybody, if you'd been a web developer for such a long time, you're used to this edit refresh, and then it like the Android build system was rough, right? It was this some build tools in Ant, and it like there was no way to modularize it out of the box. Like we had to hack it up just to even have like 4 modules or 5 modules or something like that. And it was so painful to get anything done that I was like, I need to fix the build system. Like I was like, I know I've done a lot with Java. I know it's not like fundamentally this slow to like iteratively, build this sort of thing. And so, Facebook has this hackathon culture. So I was like, all right, hackathon, totally gonna like make a new build system, like unceremoniously in the style of Google's build system. And there's actually another build system called 𝗵𝗶𝗆𝗆 that was already a different mirror of the Google build system as well. That one's written in Python. I only did C++. But yeah, and I was like, either I'm gonna make this work, then I'm gonna be happy to be a developer, or like I don't even know if I'm gonna make it here, because it's just gonna be like tearing my hair out, working on this thing. And
So if you
yeah.
didn't fix this, you would have quit the company if it
Well,
was that bad.
It was, I was like, or I'll at least switch projects or something. Or I need to find a way to find a happy place, right? And come into work every day. Like I want to write code. I want to do work. I just want to, try to do my best work. And so it was funny. Actually, I give people credit. A lot of people told me what I was doing was a very bad idea. Almost everybody except one person. I was a senior Android engineer, but nobody said no, whereas I felt like at Google, like people said no more. And so I just rolled with it, and I relatively quickly had something that was dramatically better, like at least like twice as fast or something like that. And so that that turned a lot of heads, and people were like, okay, I guess we'll go with that one, right? Like,
I think the interesting thing to me is it seemed like all the odds were stacking in favor. A lot of people who are engineers notice the same problem, would not have chosen to start the project because there's an existing one, and then also Google's got some competing one. Maybe you're not going to beat that one. What gave you the conviction that your project could beat the other ones and become the default?
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. One, like I said, I'd done other Java stuff. I was like this shouldn't be that slow. Or just as a software engineer, like this fundamentally should not be as slow as it is. And most of the pushback was of the nature like, well, if we deviate from the standard thing, we're not going to be on the standard thing. And what if it gets like 100x better next week, and now we're stuck on your thing? Which is really funny when you think about it, because there's like so many things like, making their own, PHP virtual machine and language, right? Like they've certainly embraced doing their own thing many times. Why this one was different, I don't know. It was just, I guess everything about mobile was like, how are we going to make this work? I guess there was just like a lot of fear, and again, like timelines. It's like we have the senior person, like why it sounds like they're going to go off and do a science project, but we have a hard deadline. Like, is that the best use of our time? But it worked out. I will say another thing too was I also tried to couch it a little bit. I was like, hey, I'm just trying to make an Android build system. I'm not trying to like take over the company. I'm not trying to change anyone else's project, right? Because I certainly felt that was going to cause more. I was going to invite more friction, and so I knew that I tried to make it in a way that it could support more of the company, but I never pushed it. And so I was like really heartened when a year or so later, the iOS people were like, hey, our build system sucks. Can we use Buck? I was like, yeah, sure. Like, I don't, come on board.
Yeah, that's also another interesting, because you came in and you didn't have a whole lot of credibility. You were just hired.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to build something and everyone's saying, don't do this. And then you have to convince them, hey, this is the right direction. How'd you influence that change without any credibility?
I borrowed some. There's one senior Android engineer, who was also ex-Google, 𝗪𝗶𝗺𝗀𝘀, and he was like, I think he said, right, he's like, you're gonna do it, just do it fast before like anyone gets, like cancels you or something. He's like, well, I'll support you if you get this done. So he was one of the first people, and he was a very prolific coder. So he was like genuinely very happy to have a faster dev cycle. So he was one of the first people to, give it kudos. And I think that helped a lot also. But I will say, I made some big mistakes on my way in there. You mentioned like about having no credibility is like, I came from Google, and I was like, oh, this is where, the 𝗥𝗆𝗆𝗄 labs people are, like all these like great people. And then you go to like Facebook and you're like, oh, it's a bunch of college kids. How could they possibly know what they're doing, right? And I made a few times, certainly I made the mistake like, well, at Google, we did it this way. And people were like, we really don't care. And they were right in most cases, right? That like, just because it worked there didn't mean it was going to work here.
One last thing on this topic is, what you built was way more performant than anything else by many multiples. What's the intuition, like the technical intuition behind what was done and what you did that made it so much more efficient?
I think the big thing is that I just sat down and looked at the tool from Google, and I was like, what is it actually doing, right? And where, and I think the big thing is that the Google one would kind of just, if you changed anything, it would just start over from scratch, and so that's why it was so slow, especially for incremental builds. And so then I started really understanding, like, okay, but what depends on what? Because there is these still are, I'm sure, like Android resources, which had like a very bespoke thing, and it was complicated. And because it was somewhat complicated, I think that's probably why just by default I blew everything away and started over. But once I got in there and I was like, oh, okay, we can take advantage of it. If these things don't change, then we can cache this result from this step and we don't have to redo it. And like suddenly, that made things like quite a bit faster. And then also just even supporting the idea that you could have more than like the 4 modules that we had. I mean, I think every time someone added a module, they had to add like 200 lines of XML of like Ant build script that like nobody really understood. And so it was not, so no one wanted to modularize anything, right? You didn't want to be responsible for that. So a big thing with Buck was making it that it was like a lot simpler to add a new module. And so then that also meant we ended up with more modules, and then builds are more incremental as a result, right? So it's really a change in the mindset.
So less redundant work, basically.
Yeah.
After you solved this build problems, I guess, in Android builds, and I went later to further parts of the company, I saw that you started to work more on like the IDE. What was the problem that you saw in IDEs that made you want to get into that?
So I did a brief stint after Buck on Messenger, iOS Messenger. So I was like, okay, I've done Android. Maybe I should actually branch out, even though I don't like it. And I still didn't like it. People don't even realize in Objective-C, there's a thing that happens for a long time now called ARP, like the automatic reference counting. Like nowadays, the compiler injects it, but you used to have to like actually add code in Objective-C to do every like reference count, like explicitly.
Memory allocation, right?
Yeah, or like every reference that you created, like you would have to do it, and most people have never seen this type of code, but the iOS Messenger code that came in through acquisition was so old that it was still written in this other way, and it's incredibly painful. I guess now you'd have like Codex cleaned it up or something like that, but at the time we just sucked it up, and just Xcode just didn't feel right to me. I didn't like header files and implementation files. I still don't. And also I would say for both Android and iOS, Facebook always had like the biggest app, right? We had like one app with every feature in it, and we ship it, as opposed to Google with like they'd have like a Drive app and a Sheets app or whatever. But they also owned one of the platforms, so they could put 20 apps by default on there. And so what that meant is that Facebook was always hitting the scaling limits of every mobile developer tool before everybody else, which was painful. But actually, as a DevTools person, it was kind of interesting because we got to solve problems that nobody had solved before, and not just as a science project, but because it was like real business value. Right. And so Xcode, similarly, we talked to Apple. We were like, hey, Xcode's like not really scaling to our project. Or like, your project's too big. You should make it smaller. Like that was kind of the feedback that we got from them. And so it seemed justifiable to like go and build an editor. And it was a similar thing. I was like, what is an IDE doing, right? It's like it's talking to Clang, like the language server and that sort of stuff. I was like, we could build like a nicer shell on top of that. And then we had started by that point deviating from Git and switching to Mercurial as a company. I was like, no one's going to support Mercurial out of the box, right? And so like that should happen. And then like, oh, actually, if Buck is going to be our build system, then like we really that's Xcode's never going to do all of these bespoke Facebook things, right? So it seemed justifiable to like invest the time to try to like improve that experience. And I didn't feel that way about Android because IntelliJ was actually like quite good, and we had figured out how to make that work at scale. But Xcode was a little more difficult at that point.
So there's Xcode, which was bad and fit the existing needs, and then there was another IDE that another team was building. I think it was web-based, if I
It
recall
was
correctly.
it was web-based. I'm not laughing at that part. That part's fine. But it was built off of an abandoned Google open source project written in Gwt, which is Google Web Toolkit, where you would write Java and it would code gen to JavaScript for everything. And I tried to build on what they had. I tried to build some credibility. It even actually sped up their build a bit. But again, kind of like looking at the iteration times, and also I was like, this is an abandoned open source project. It's written in Google Web Toolkit. And I was like, we are the React company at that point, right? Like why would we not empower, people who want to build dev tools to use, to build on technologies that we are the leader in and actually really like, because we think we're actually really good. So I was like, you guys are crazy. And so I started, and it's similar to the thing where I mentioned with the Buck, I was like, I started it as the Java build tool, not the everything build tool, right? I was like, it was a similar thing. I was like, hey, I'm going to go over here and start this other editor, but we're just going to focus on iOS. Like I'm not trying to take things over.
Yeah, you didn't want all the friction. And I mean, that team, they had all the existing users though, right? They had thousands of engineers.
Even maybe 1,000, I think.
Eventually, leadership sided with what eventually became 𝗪𝗏, which is what you built. But why did they side with you when you didn't have any users on your shared product?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a combination of two things. I mean, I think the arguments that I made in favor of like the technology stack to build on. Another was that 𝗪𝗏 was a desktop application, and part of it was, if this is actually going to be an iOS Xcode replacement, like people are going to want to need to be able to talk to the simulator or plug in the phone or whatever. Like in theory, we could go through the web and do all those things, but it just seems like a lot of extra work. And I think the other part is that I had built up some credibility with the Buck thing, that they're willing to like take a gamble, or like, well, the last thing worked out, like, we'll try this one.
I saw that this, in combination with some of your other work, led to your promotion to E8, which is also known as principal in the industry. What was your reaction to that at the time?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I was very excited. I felt like, in the ways that I had been out of step, I felt like, when I was at Google, I was like, this was also not just, it was also validation that like, oh, now I'm also growing, not just like technically, but like understanding like what it means to kind of, do the things that like are in line with your employer. And so like that also just, was equally valuable or satisfying.
I know that 𝗪𝗏 was open source, and I think Buck was as well, if I recall correctly. What's the rationale for open sourcing? Like what are the pros and cons of open sourcing technology that you build?
Yeah, I mean, let's see, Buck is the more interesting one. 𝗪𝗏 kind of didn't really get adopted externally. I think in both cases, I think, all these companies have benefited so much from open source. Like I think there's just a feeling of like, if it's not really the secret sauce, like let's share this with other people, right? Like, I mean, done like Codex as well, and a number of other things in my career. So I do feel like that sharing of information is just good, even if no one uses your tool, just as like seeing as a reference of like how a thing could be done, could be great. And in the better scenarios, you actually get meaningful contributions back and things like that. And I remember like, I think Uber adopted Buck, I think Airbnb did. Like, it was funny, right? Like I said, like Facebook was the biggest app, so we would hit all these problems first, and then this next wave of companies would start hitting these things and be like, let's check out what these guys did. I think, I mean, honestly, we also, at Google, it was it's internally it's Blaze, externally it's Bazel. So we were open source first, and we always did kind of wonder, like, if we put some pressure on, like, we get, and ultimately did. I think we've gotten a little bit of credit from that unofficially from some of the folks who worked on that. But I think also that, it's also like a recruiting thing too, or just showing like, hey, if you want to like, being at like the leading edge in like whatever area this technology is, and you want to do this all the time, not just as like a drive-by contributor, like, this is what we do, this is who we are.
And then this decision to open source, was this a bottoms up decision where engineers said, we're just going to do this? Or is this kind of also leadership buy-in? Hey, this is going to be valuable. And you got like a doc.
Yeah. I think both cases, it was certainly like bottoms up. I don't think, so, things like React and PyTorch, like those are like the big success stories, right? Where the value back to the company is like unquestionable. And then there's this like longer tail of things where I think depending on the economy and other things, the managers get grumbly if they feel like their engineers are like doing too much open source or things like that. So it's almost always I feel like bottoms up. I think, yeah, I would say that's often the case. But it wasn't like met with a lot of resistance, and you usually get like a good conference talk or two and a nice blog post. And those blog posts, like, do, I would say, pay dividends over time.
Right,
Like
drawing, recruiting.
Yeah, like they have like a longer shelf life than I think people realize.
Okay, so you got your E8 promo at this point, and I imagine the expectations maybe in your mind are kind of going up a little bit, and now you need to go and find a E8 problem, I guess.
Yeah.
So what'd you do after you got promoted?
I think that's where I did I got a little over my skis and I tried to help with web speed, I think is what I did. Because again, it was a thing that was like a really big problem for the just the load time of Facebook.com was not in great shape. The architecture was a bit stale, and it was just the problem was so big, and I didn't have. I think a lot of people who had worked on web at Facebook had worked on it for like a long time, and like I had put myself in mobile and dev tools. I actually wasn't in that world, and I remember I was like, what do we do? I mean, actually, I sat down with another person. We started like compiling V8 from source and trying to see like if we could like change the way that we generated JavaScript, if it was like going to be friendlier to V8. Like we were just trying like wacky things, none of which panned out, by the way. And it was there's different people who are like good for different projects, and I think that was just not the one. Like I'm better in a project that involves writing a lot of code from the beginning, and I think a project like that was like more about like looking at data and talking to a lot of people, and like that's not my strength.
I think you mentioned at this point in your career the idea of a hero quest.
Yeah.
What's that mean?
The idea that it's like it's embarrassing because there's like some amount of ego. This idea that there's this like Gordian knot, and all these engineers are like, oh, if only someone would come in and like solve this engineering problem. I was like, I know JavaScript, right? I thought I could just come in that way, and but I didn't. I definitely did not. And I think that it's been an important learning, and I've had to relearn it like at least one other time, that I can do a lot of things, but there's a smaller subset of things that I genuinely enjoy doing, and that I'm going to be a lot more successful, right, if I stay in the things that I genuinely enjoy doing. I try to expand that over time, but we don't all have to be the best at everything, right? I think we should accept it and embrace it.
So then how'd you find the E8 problem after that? Like, what was the next step?
That was I think a bit of luck as well. Or I guess we had sometimes we'd have these little summits with like smaller groups of engineers about like brainstorming what's gonna bite us in the future. I mentioned that. It's like the repo keeps growing. They're gonna hit some scaling problem at some point, and a person, or my manager, then became my manager, Brian O'Sullivan, he decided to get some people together to like work on making a virtual file system to try to get ahead of that problem. And so we got myself and Adam Simpkins and 𝗨𝗏𝗀𝘀, both tremendous engineers. I actually thought I was the worst engineer on the project for quite a bit.
You mentioned a virtual file system. On a high level, what's the benefit to a company like Meta for if you had something like that?
If you have bought into the monorepo philosophy, right? Put all the code in one repo. Most things that people do need only a subset of that repo, like have to look at the files at any point in time. And so the idea is that you design all your tooling around this virtual file system so that when you say clone the repo, or then you update to a different commit or anything like that, you don't actually have to like write out every single file in the repo on disk when you make that change, which is the default in your traditional file system, because that is going to grow proportionally to the time with the size of the repo, right? So at some point you're going to be very sad, and so there's actually kind of at least two parts to it. One is building this virtual file system that's like, hey, I know the user's at this commit. If the operating system asks me for the contents of the file, like I can go get it and it will appear like they had actually laid out all the files. The other part of it, which is the part that maybe I was actually better at, I think, is then try to anticipate, well, we have all these tools in our tool chain that are used to just reading all the files. You just rip grep, it just reads everything, right? That sort of thing. And how do we start changing also our development flow and our tools such that they are designed with the virtual file system in mind? Because if you just materialize all the files with your tool, now you've like actually just lost all the benefits that you've made.
So on a high level, it's basically just lazy loading a huge file system. So it's more efficient because you don't need to do everything at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so that part of this project that you said you're better at is integrating everything into this on top of that primitive.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that I did, actually with Hansen Wong, who's here actually on the Codex team with me now, was I was like, oh, okay, the traditional way you have, you want really fast file search in your IDE and your editor. And the way most of these things do is the first thing you do is they walk the entire file system to find out what the files are. And I was like, well, that's gonna be a serious problem, right? It's gonna undo all the benefits. Like, and then it's one of these things is like not, first it was like, okay, how can we implement file search that's not gonna undo all the benefits? And then it was, how can we do it even better than how it's done today? And so we ended up building this file system called Miles, short for My Files. And it, on like kind of like a cron job, it would index, it would ingest all the new commits that had come in on trunk, and keep track of like which files had been added or removed. So just like the names of the files, not the contents, because all you need is the names. And then Hansen had some clever ideas about how we maintained that index such that we could support fuzzy file matching. So instead of just substring matching, right? Like you type, like if you have like a camel case thing, you want to be able to type just maybe the uppercase letters or just your spelling's bad or what have you. And so it came up with this really interesting way to represent, kind of all the files that had been seen at some point, and then some bits to represent, if I'm at this commit, was this file present or not present at that point in time? And then also when you sent a query to this thing, so you'd send like what commit you're at, and like if you've added any files locally or removed any locally. And I think we got this, over 1 million files in like, I don't know, like 10 to 20 milliseconds or something like that. So that you would be in your editor, typing. And so that was way faster than I think than, like what Xcode or like even VS Code or something like would give you out of the box. And so that was, so like it was solving a problem for Eden, that was the name of the file system originally, the virtual file system, in anticipation before it was even ready. But then it was so fast, and it was available as a thrift service internally, like people started using it for all sorts of other things. I think when I left, like, I don't know, I think there were at least like 30 servers running Miles, like spread around the globe. And so clearly that was more than just people like personally searching for files, and then you did that much, capacity.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, when you talked about, I guess, the implementation details, most people they don't use leak code on the job, but that sounds like, I was thinking about I don't even know how you input that. Is it like a tree, like a try thing?
No, so that's what's funny. This was pretty cool in that we had kind of like two parallel arrays. One was like the file contents, and one was maybe an integer into that index, I forget, and then we had a 64-bit mask that was like, it was like, so you had like 26 lowercase, 26 capital, 10 digits, and like maybe dash and whatever.
Yeah.
And it was every bit was set if that character was used at all in the file that you were searching. And so the first thing was we could like blow through that list and exclude a bunch of things like right off the top. But we was also like very designed, like all these arrays were in parallel to each other, so that for like cache wise, we knew it'd be very efficient for the CPU to like read memory, linearly. And then it lent itself to, you could just partition that array. It, lent itself to parallelism. So it was really, I should really probably write it up at some point, because
that is really cool.
It was funny because it wasn't just kind of like out of the textbook. That's for sure.
I understand that, you worked on Eden, and then obviously there's Miles as well. Yeah. And then these eventually led to another promotion. And but prior to that promotion, there was some learnings you might have had about influence and conflict in org. So maybe if you want to share that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things, I guess, about being an E8 who primarily writes code, right? There's other people, I'd say actually the majority of people at that level or higher are not writing code, right? They're actually kind of exclusively spent doing more like influence or working across teams, writing the big Google Doc and getting everyone on board and all that sort of stuff. And so, as an E8 trying to have that level, like, that level of impact that you're expected to have, it's like, oh, it's hard to do that just writing code. So it's like, I need to spend at least some time probably influencing other people. That would probably be good for me. That would probably make my manager happy. And I think, sometimes you're just so confident in some insights you have that, or certainly I was, that I just came down like way too hard, I would say. And that did not go well for me. And so like promo got delayed because I was very excited or anxious about when Microsoft acquired GitHub, and because Nuclide was built on this primarily GitHub technology, and I was like, that's gonna go away because VS Code's gonna not make them be a project anymore, which was true, which did happen. And I was just so anxious that this was like now a risk, right? And I was pushing people, but I didn't really account for the fact that people were happy with what they were doing at the moment and like didn't want their cheese moved, right out from under them. And so, I got like a little bit of a talking to. I had to wait a little bit for promo and things like that. But I actually even got some coaching, I think, after that point. I can't remember the exact chronology. To work on that, like specifically.
What's the number one thing you learned about coaching?
I would say for me is like, I think I'm more aware of like things that trigger me, like be technical decisions or what have you, and recognize when that's happening and be like, okay, let's not act in that moment. Or, if I don't think I can have the conversation, like, or I'm not in the best place to have it, like maybe I go talk to the person's manager instead, rather than like, like bull in China shop to the engineer and be like, so I have this thing, I'm thinking about it this way, I'm kind of riled up about it, like help me, like how can I, work with your team or whatever. Like that's happened too.
Well, it's interesting to me in your career because the promo got postponed and you were seeing that VS Code was gonna come up and the thing that Nuclide was built on was gonna go down. And you were actually right in hindsight too. Like in the future, that is what happened. And you were battling for what was right, yet you were told, calm down a little bit. And this, so, I mean, what are your thoughts when you saw things play out and you go, actually, I was right the whole time?
I did have some conversations like about a year later, and I was like, hey, can we balance the ledger a little bit? Like it dinged me pretty hard for that thing, and it was kind of good. And we worked it out, I would say.
Okay, so I guess the learning is just how you went about it, not what you were like.
Yeah, yeah. I would say that's true.
You seem to have a great time at Meta and eventually you left. So what was the thing that drew you to OpenAI?
Yeah, I mean, a number of things. I mean, one was so I interviewed at the end of 2023 with OpenAI, I believe, and I had spent 2023 at Meta trying to do LLM-based developer tools, right? With there's a we had our own light version, even MetaMate, there's like a little version of GitHub Copilot, right? That one we did like a paper and a talk on that one.
It was a code compose, right?
That was Code Compose, yeah. And we like now there's a lot of enthusiasm around delivering quickly and pushing the boundaries of that sort of stuff. And I mean, truthfully, I mean, you get feedback on some of these things. It's like, why is this not GPT-4? And I was like, well, we're on like Llama 2. It's not the same thing. And I was not a researcher, right? I was like, but I just wanted to build the experiences, right, and that sort of thing. And so that was one thing, was that like I wanted to build stuff and I wanted to go to the place where I could actually build with the best model. Two, again, was similar to like Google originally, like seeing the people who were coming here to OpenAI, and I was like, well, those are people I really respect. I was like, I could actually work with more senior people, like Meta 8s and 9s at OpenAI. I felt like that I could where I was. Third was just like, this also seems like, and it has been just a very special place at the point in time. So I told a lot of people, I was like, I felt like this would be like the most similar to starting at Google in 2000. So not to 1998, but like, let's say 2000, right? Like they kind of got some footing and got some, product market fit. And so like, just as a personal level, that was just a very exciting thing. And the last one was that, funny thing is that when I really enjoyed Calendar because it was consumer and I shipped to a lot of people. I went to Facebook because I thought huge consumer place. Ended up not doing consumer at all, right? Ended up doing developer tools, but like, my users were my friends at work. It was just like 20,000 people, not like a billion people, but it was good enough for me at the time. And then, thinking about OpenAI and then the chance to actually, come back to consumer, or at least like have a large user base, right? And so now working on Codex, I went over like over 1 million weeklies, or I forget how much it is right now, and just keeps growing like a hockey stick, or more like vertical line than hockey stick even. So it's like way more than the 20 to 40,000 developers I could affect at Meta.
Yeah, absolutely. And dev tooling for the industry almost.
Yeah.
Meta, when I think of the company, it's kind of engineering driven. Like engineers are king and queen, I guess, and they kind of like drive everything. It's very bottoms up from that sense. And I feel like a lot of the lab companies are also like that, but on the research side. So rather than engineers, the first class citizen, it's like, let's make sure the research goes well. And for good reason, right? Like that's also part of why you came, is the models are good.
Yep.
But as an engineer, or you mentioned, you weren't doing research. What are your thoughts on that research-led culture versus engineering-led culture?
I mean, it was certainly an adjustment, right? I think if anyone who comes here and says otherwise is a liar. But if you've been at like the Fangs or whatever, but they are, when you talk about impact, right, which I think is important, like a real, like you genuinely mean it. Like I love the work that I do on Codex and the harness, and I think we do a lot of very meaningful things. But if the model weren't very good, it wouldn't really matter what we did, on the harness, right? And so, I don't. That's how it is, I would say. But I feel really great. Like we sit right next to the research team. We're really close with them. And so that relationship that we have, that we get to co-develop the thing. I mean, that was another reason, leaving Meta. I mean, was that for in the LM space was like, I want to build the product with the people who are building the model so we can do this thing together. I mean, maybe you could do that there, sort of, but not. Anyway, the impact was not, quite the same.
So you mentioned, I mean, when you got here, it sounds like you were working on Codex and starting that project up. So I understand with the initial launch of Codex CLI, it was not exactly what you hoped for, like in terms of how it was received, but later it kind of really all came together. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's been a wild ride. So Codex CLI, we launched it in April 2025. It was kind of like this one more thing moment at the end of the 𝗧𝗶𝗺𝗀𝘀𝗁 live stream. And so we demoed it live, we open sourced it, open repo at that point. A lot of people tried it out, everyone was excited to try a new coding agent. And it was pretty good, but it was pretty rushed to get it out the door, right? There was which in some ways was good for engagement because now we're open source. We were getting pull requests, coming in all over the place. And I forget, I feel like we're like 10 to 20,000 stars in like a week or two or something like that. So like that part was fun. And there were people who did like it, it's like nobody liked it or anything like that. But then I think we weren't maybe quite staffed to like really drive that the way that we needed to, because we're trying to cover multiple things as a company. And so just a month after that, and a team of like 7 engineers and I forget how many researchers launched Codex web or cloud web, where you could use Codex in a container, or you could just kick off a new thing from your phone, which is super cool. And that was like a more well-staffed effort. And I think that one is still I think the long-term vision is correct. But I think with a lot of this stuff that we've seen, you have to bring the users with you, and I think that was just like a little bit ahead of its time, and people were still actually more into the local coding agents. And so we kind of we saw the web product, like there's a big adoption initially. It wasn't as sticky, I would say, as we had hoped. And then through the summer, both products still kept we're working on both. But then somewhere that midsummer, again, like I said, is like this moment, like local agents are still the stronger product market fit. But again, I still think in the limit personally, right? Like you're gonna need more machines than just your laptop as a place for agents to run. And so we shifted quite a bit over the summer. So we brought more people onto the Codex CLI. Yeah, a few key things. Bring more people on. GPT-5 was going to come out, and that was looking really, really good. And I think I was personally excited about, because I had prototyped it a couple times before, was that in addition to the CLI, then we also had enough staffing. We had also started working on the VS Code extension. And and I felt actually very strongly that the terminal is good for a lot of things, but it has a lot of limitations. Always, it's just like you make a lot of compromises to make a nice UI in the terminal. Whereas VS Code, we didn't have to make quite as many compromises. And so I think like August, I think was a crazy month. I think GPT-5 came out. I think we released our new refreshed terminal UI. Also, the GPT open source model came out. We supported that in the 𝗬𝗎 as well. So that was really cool that we had an open weights model and an open harness. And then later that month, the VS Code extension came out, and so we were just like shipping like crazy. And that's really where like that confluence of things, I would say, is where we started to see the inflection point that's brought us to like the vertical growth that we're at today. And so that's that's been really exciting. I mean, some of these things you can go in the repo, check for yourself, right? And check me on some of these things, in terms of number of people, number of commits, and all this sort of thing. And yeah, so it's been quite a ride.
You mentioned the local versus the remote version of these coding agents, and it sounds like you have a lot of conviction that the right long-term direction is not the local versions, it's remote and in the cloud. Why is that?
Well, I think that the people who actually, for whom it is sticky now, and I think there'll be more of it, is that if you imagine you want to just automatically for the agent at every like GitHub issue or linear tile thing that comes in or anything like that. I mean, obviously, there's there's costs with those things, but or it could be abused. But like, let's say for an internal private repo, right? That you want to be able to just have it be a piece in any sort of automation pipeline, right? And so you can't have all that happening on your laptop. And so I guess, I mean, as an individual IC, maybe we'll still personally spend more time with the local agent, but in terms of compute time of agents doing work, right? I think getting that set up in the cloud, I think a little bit, it's like a little more to get set up right now, but once you have it, it's quite nice.
I see. Okay, so you're not saying that product, the local one, will change. You're saying that like across the industry, the compute that goes towards agents, majority will be in the cloud. And
yeah, I mean, even in I think maybe when the VS Code extension first came out, one of the things was the ability to take the conversation that you were having and like hit a button, have it like transfer to the cloud if you were set up to do it, right? And so I think that we'll continue to see that where you maybe you're working on something, you want to throw it over here, you're like bring it back, when it's done.
your Codex usage is 5x since the beginning of the year, and over 1 million people are using it now. I'm curious, has your AI workflow changed a lot since you've started to use this newer version of Codex?
Yeah, it has. It has. I'm a much bigger user of the app now, maybe than I thought I would be. Yeah, like for a while I was very strongly in like our VS Code extension. Like I want that sidebar. I want all the code there next to me. I feel like these things should be, together. I'm not a person who doesn't look at the code. I'm not I don't for projects that are like true prototypes that are throwaway, like I will actually not look at the code. It's very freeing. I understand why people are so excited about it. But for the code that goes into Codex itself, I'm like, no, I still need to look at this, right? This is pretty important. This is like what's gonna, affect everybody else. But you start to get a sense of, okay, I'm confident the model's going to be able to do this, this change and this sort of thing. Like I don't need to babysit it. I'm going to just like write a lot up front. And so, I have like 4 or 5 clones of the Codex repo on my machine, and I have enjoyed in the Codex app, like the multitasking. Is just a lot easier because now you're just kind of hang out in one window, and I try, and it's. I don't know if it's a game exactly, but it's like, it's like how much throughput can I get, right? In terms of how many balls can I juggle in the air? Sometimes it feels like it can feel like a little hectic when you're really trying to context
switch. Sure.
But at the same time, you're like, I'm getting a lot more done, and that, I almost feel a little bad writing code by hand sometimes because you're like, I could have, if I had asked this in the right way. It's like when you started, it was like, oh, I'm just going to change these 3 lines. And then like, 30 minutes later, you're like, oh, I kind of, we all like to type still, I think, and that sort of thing.
What percent of your code would you say is human written versus the model generates it these days?
Oh man, models got to be like 80 to 90%. I mean, yeah. I mean, like especially like debugging a test or like the CI thing is bad. Like I'm like, hey, you know how to write, print debug, whatever. Like, and that's great. That's really freeing.
Digging into the problems that are suitable for LLMs and the ones that are not. Like what do you need to see where you think, okay, I need to go in and, write it myself? What's that 10%? And also what's in that 80-90%?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. I think about that. Because every time I sit down, I'm like, should I write this? I mean, the answer is almost always no. There's things that are like lower level, and someone, so Codex, the harness, the part that I spend my time on is in Rust, and that means that we can do, and we do like operating system specific things in that code base. And actually, I spend a lot of time on the sandboxing, right? So the thing that really upholds like the security integrity of what we're doing, and the model can't go outside the bounds that you set. I do more of that by hand because I need to make really sure that that's all correct, right? That our test coverage is good. or sometimes I'll, seed it. And then, once I've got like the groundwork and like, okay, I have the pieces that I was had a lot of feelings about, and then could let it like fill in the rest and that sort of thing. But, a lot of like refactors and things like that. Actually, I think like a lot right now is like, I'll have it build up a big, PR that does too many things, but I know it does too many things. I'll be like, okay, please, please split this up into reviewable sized commits, things like that. Like, I think about how much time I probably spent on that sort of stuff before, and now I can delegate, frees you up.
What about like code review? Is there like what % of lines of code do you and at OpenAI generally are people reviewing manually, or are there agents that are like, imagine you write a test or something. I don't really need to review that. I mean,
yeah, I would say I liked the approach where, the agent should do multiple rounds of review or whatever until it's confident and that it's like kind of worth a human's time of looking at it. But we still do look at it like ultimately before it goes in, I would say, generally speaking. I think there's, we have like our agents empty file like everybody else does. There's still sometimes you find like a gap in knowledge that needs like that some context that needs to get added back into there, or it's just things that we haven't memorialized that the agentness, but like as a human I still happen to know.
Right.
And things like that. So we do catch things. But I'll say actually now that people are also using AI to write their like pull request summaries, our summaries across the team, I would say, are getting way better. So now, at least also when I'm going into review, right, it's been reviewed by Codex. There's a summary that's like that we actually make sure it has like the why and the what of why, the reason behind the PR. So that is certainly, I think, helping like get through these PRs faster, which is good because there was a lot more review to do.
That's amazing. I feel like 50% of diffs have like, almost blank the test plan says, I don't know, arc build or whatever the command is. I want to talk about the Codex CLI that's open source. Why is it open source?
For something that's that critical to like what's going on your machine, right? Like that like that's one of the aspects of open source. That I'm not, the most zealous about this sort of thing, but I sympathize with it. This idea that like, hey, you're going to put this thing on my machine. I care about what it's doing, right? And I think in this domain in particular, it's really important that people can look at it, and have an idea of what it's doing, because people have a lot of questions about AI agents and that sort of thing, and so I think this area, this domain, I think it's actually really important, and also we we have gotten a lot of I think like great contributions and bug reports and things like that we would have missed out on, and then also I think it's just sharing with the world with like how this is done. So we do it through code, right? I've put out one blog post about how the agent loop works. Like there is a plan to do more of that. I'm actually excited to. It's just it's just time is the limiting factor. It's a desire.
Really not.
It was funny because I had two candidates who came through, and one's like, he's like, AI wrote it, right? I was like, no, I wrote it. And another person came in, and is like, oh, you can tell that that you did not outsource the. Okay, good, right? I was like, oh, thank you. So yeah.
You mentioned the blog post. How does Codex find what is available to it in its environment? When I'm running these things, I'll see it's kind of amazing. It's thinking to itself and like discovering all these things in my terminal. So yeah, how does that typically work?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few. I mean, there's obviously what is when Codex is base training, like it loves to use ripgrep, it uses ripgrep very well to find all sorts of things. And then there's if you have your agents MD file and you're saying, hey, in this repo, like these tools are really important, right? You should use these, right? Or the readmes or whatever. Or obviously, if you use MCP and you associate these MCP servers with your, where you're working on, right? That injects the set of tool definitions like at the start of the conversation, right? So then that kind of so that's not even like discovery on Codex's part, right? It's kind of just like put it front and center there.
I see. So some of it's the harness explicitly throwing that into the context.
Yeah.
And then there is a big chunk though where the model is just doing all the heavy lifting of finding things. Is that right?
Yeah.
Kind of like reflecting over your career, the breadth and depth of your work. If we look across all of it, I mean, it's insane. You're JavaScript front end, then you have all these dev tools, build, fuzzy file search, virtual. Now you're working on Codex. I'm sure you had to continue your engineering education to kind of get through all these projects. What are the top technical books that have helped you educate yourself?
Yeah, I mean, so one was this book on operating systems. It's like 1,000 pages or something like this. It's the Addison Wesley book. I'm trying to remember the author, but it was funny because when I was working on the virtual file system, so I had actually gotten to that point in my career without ever writing C. Like undergrad, like it was like more theoretical, like we just never had to touch it. And then yet I'm like working on a virtual file system project, and that was like very low operating system. That's why I was, joke that I was kind of the worst engineer of the project. And, and someone said something and I realized, I was like, I don't know what they're talking about. This is kind of embarrassing. And I was just like, what book do I have to read? And I think my manager, Aaron Kushner at the time, was like, well, there's this 1,000-page book. And I was like, done. So I bought it, read the thing cover to cover. I like took it to Hawaii with me. I took it everywhere until I finished it. It's kind of amazing and sad or weird, like how far many of us can get like in software engineering without really having a clue how computers work. Like there's just so many of those levels of abstraction. But on one hand, it's very freeing, and then on the other hand, it's a little bananas. And I think that what I would say to people right now is actively trying to go like deeper through the layers and understand these things. Like, because many times I saw other people do it and now I can do it, is that there are problems some other people could solve that I couldn't solve because I just didn't know that like there was this cruft between these two layers, and if you got rid of it, right, you get like a 10x improvement or something like that, right? If you're just operating so high up, you don't really know what you can break down. So that and so in terms of books, like I've enjoyed the O'Reilly the Rust books. I big fan of Rust. I think but they're also like well written and thorough. And then honestly, another thing I've been telling people that's not in the book category but probably more fun, and I learned a lot actually, are these CTFs, or like capture the flag, like security type competitions. And just it helps with like kind of like adversarial mindset. It helps with, I think, they're usually just like it's like a decathlon, like a computer decathlon, I feel like, right? Because there'll be multiple challenges, and maybe this one you need to like understand assembly, and this one you need to understand like what someone's like janky PHP admin page is doing and all this sort of thing. And it just forces this breadth on you in a way that's kind of hard to generate otherwise. And it's also just more fun because it's like a game and that sort of thing.
Can you give some context on what CTF is?
Yeah, so it can be a number of things, but it's usually a competition, usually in like the InfoSec, the security domain, and there'll be a set of there's like the Jeopardy style one, which is like there's a bunch of challenges and like designed, like crafted ahead of time, and they all have point values associated with them. And so there's usually some fixed amount of time, and it could be individual, it could be with a team, and you're trying to solve these things. And there's a flag, there's always like a secret piece of text in there that usually has some format. And the way is that you basically, if you can discover the secret piece of text, that means that you have the challenge is set up that you would only have gotten that if you had figured out reverse engineered or whatever you were supposed to do, and then you submit that piece of text, and that's your token to demonstrate that you solved the challenge. And so it could be like a race to like solve everything first or get the most points in a certain amount of time or different things like that.
So it's kind of like an escape room, but in your terminal, you use only computers to figure everything out.
Yes.
I see. Okay. And your recommendation is people who want to become better engineers, they should invest in doing some of these CTF because they make you solve problems that make you a better engineer.
Yeah, and and then you also develop skills and things that you just wouldn't have. If you're just like writing React every day, like you're probably not gonna like open up GDB and like reverse a tic-tac-toe game. But like I did that because of a CTF challenge was to do exactly that.
Right.
But then it's like, but then I learned how to use GDB and like and then you start, when you're faced with other problems, you're like, oh, my just toolkit of ways to solve things is just much broader now.
A lot of people, especially earlier in their career, they see the power of Codex doing everything for them in the terminal. And I just imagine them saying, oh, well, I don't need to learn GDB because Codex knows it. So
Yeah.
what would your advice be given the landscape of these AI tools for people thinking about their engineering education?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think everyone's like struggling to answer that question right now. I do think about it, a lot. And I don't have a great answer. I kind of personally come back to my thing about like, um, I still think like trying to forcefully kind of go through the levels of abstraction and just understand, more like at a deeper level how things work, is going to be important. I mean, I think this will change. I'm sure this will change over time, but right now it's still kind of like, the questions that you ask the agent is going to affect the quality of the thing that you get out, right? So if you're not asking the right questions, you're not maybe going to get the best engineering solution out the other side. As things go on, perhaps that will also be, another layer that's removed. I mean, I think, that's certainly where we're going. I don't know on what time frame we'll get there. Things do seem to be happening faster than we expect, but yeah, I think in general, but learning how to ask what the right question is, and I haven't, for myself, even like totally pinned down what that means for someone who's like starting out new, right? I fortunately have experience to fall back on, or like that's where that taste or that intuition of what to ask has developed. But if you're starting out, I'm still not sure yet, and it's also hard to say because we don't really know 100% where everything's going.
Yeah, when you reflect over your career, the expectations at these really high levels is kind of crazy. I mean, it's like already for most people, this E7 or senior staff level is this unattainable level of impact. So someone who gets promoted to that level is thinking, I got to really work super hard now because the bar is like up here. And then you went 2 levels past that. And so I'm curious, like in the day-to-day now, what are your thoughts on these like crazy expectations? Is it stressful for you?
I mean, it was never not stressful, I think, for me, because I think also because I sat in calibrations, right? And so for a bunch of other people, you talk about their level, you talk about their impact, and you want to be really fair and have this integrity around, well, this level means this thing, and this is the impact. Or like, that's what it meets all is, that's what it exceeds is. And then knowing that, like, then you're, playing it out in your mind, like, well, someone's sitting in my calibration and talking about this thing and they want to be fair, right? And it is a little scary. Like, you get to E8 and you're like, oh, it's a D1 or a director. And you're like, how do I have as much impact as a person who has maybe like over 100 people in their org? And so that's hard. A lot of people do it. Again, a lot of people who are in IC who do it more by a different form of people management, right? Where they're trying to, like write the right doc and get the people aligned and do that sort of thing. And the reason that they do it and are not a director is that oftentimes the people I've talked to, people who are in this, like that they're like, well, I have this technical credibility, or because I built this thing, like when I go to the team and talk to them, it lands differently than if like a engineering director does, or some version of that, right? It happens a lot. And so then, when you say you're influencing, 50 to 100 people as a senior IC, then you're like, oh, okay, that's like, D1 impact. Whereas as if you're a coder IC, being really thoughtful about the projects that you pick, and it can't just be like, this is fun for me type of project. I mean, if you actually care about, not getting fired or you're getting like 𝗧𝗏𝗺𝗀𝘀 or better. And even when I would start a project, certainly like the later I went on, I would think a lot about like, okay, like I maybe there's this feature, I just want to write it because it's fun, and I'd be like, oh no, I should let somebody else do that, and think about, okay, I mean, it's kind of like with Codex now, like what code should I personally write to maximize my impact versus if someone else could do it about as well as me, let's say 80% is good, I should probably let, have someone else do that. But even then, if you're leading a 5-person project, is that still getting to E8, E9 impact still hard. So really finding that project that's a force multiplier. So like the virtual file system was a really great project because that was gonna, we knew that down the road, like this was really gonna unlock so many things, prevent us from being completely blocked, right? Actually, another big part of it is, and one of my managers talked to me about it, is not actually recognizing senior managers enough who are the person who pairs the senior IC with the right project. Mm-hmm. And because some senior engineers are amazing, fixers/coders, but they're not the idea comer-uppers with. And they're the person you want for like very difficult technical projects. I don't want to like out anybody here, but I have people in mind. And but a lot of times it's the manager who realizes like, oh, this project needs this person, right? And like that person would have never realized it themselves.
One of your old colleagues, 𝗪𝗵𝗲𝗀𝘀, I think I asked him, what are some other engineers that you admire and why? And he mentioned your name, of course, and specifically he talked about your ability to start projects was really good. And obviously, I mean, look at all these projects, right? I mean, a lot of them you created them out of nowhere. Like there was just, you had an idea and you went off and built a prototype. You came back and you were very convincing that was a better solution. Do you have any advice for engineers who they have a problem and a solution and they want to like build a project from scratch?
I mean, I don't know, a lot of good projects I think come from being a little bit dissatisfied about something, right? And I think it's funny, like sometimes I for better or for worse, I was just so charging ahead and just like building the thing that like not really thinking about like what the best way to do it was. So actually a really funny example is Google Calendar. So going back really far, I was like, I want weather. I want to have weather, little icons showing the weather in Google Calendar. And I was like, I'm going to do it, and I had mostly been JavaScript, especially, and not done any of the backend stuff. And I just like charged through and I cobbled things together and, made it happen. And then my tech lead was like, wait, how are you storing that information about like the weather and stuff? And I was like, oh, I just like, threw a blob of like XML and every like thing. He's like, we should have talked about protocol buffers. Or I was like, like binary formats to save bytes that I was just so, set on weather of all things that like I never bothered to ask anybody if there was like a better way to do what I was doing. I was like, it's done.
So I mean, I guess that's a unique skill of yours, is the digging into the dissatisfaction and solving your own problems. Seems like almost every single one of these projects is, I want something to happen, or this shouldn't be this way, and then you went and you solved it. Yeah. But I think another unique thing that I see is a lot of people, they get to work and I don't know, they're in their dev environment. I'm sure there were many other people who saw with the Buck story, for instance, they go, oh wow, this build is really slow. Oh well, like I guess I'm gonna go to the micro kitchen and get it and call its builds. What gave you the confidence to know that you could make it so much better?
I mean, that one was, I have to credit, like having been at Google, I never worked on the 𝗪𝗲 team. I never knew how that like worked. I never touched the code or anything, but I was like, I know that there's a thing out there that has this shape and is a lot better than this thing. So that's an existence proof. Whether I could do it or not, like TBD, right? But I think that was helpful on that one.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of, I guess, prior art that gives me, confidence in things. And I usually generally identify myself as a coding machine. I guess with Codex now everyone's a coding machine, but that, I felt that I always had confidence, like, build a prototype quickly, right? And at least answer that question, or like the basic, test my basic hypothesis, like spiritually, should there be a way forward to this thing that I think should exist? And, generally, like, if you are determined, you'd find a way.
Yeah, I've noticed that pattern. A lot of people who go to big companies, they see this world-class infrastructure, and then they go to the other company. Oh, you don't have this, you don't have this, and they build their, those new versions of it. I've read a lot of your writing at this point, and it is so clear. It's some of the best examples of good technical writing. What advice would you have for engineers who want to write better?
I mean, I think a lot of it is, well, I think reading other good writing is certainly a good start, right? You start maybe, consciously or subconsciously start to pick up patterns of like what is out there. I think, really high level thinking about like what is it that I'm trying to convey? What would someone actually really want to know? And outlining a lot up front, right? Is I think a lot of people give this feedback, but it's impressive how really important that is. And just being like, does this set of things like linearly follow? I think is a big thing. And then asking yourself, oh, I went from this point to this point. Was that too big of a jump? Is there something that like somebody actually like would have reasonably missed? And I think, personally, I feel like I have a reasonable feel for like where that gap would arise. And then if you can kind of anticipate that and magically put in the example that like someone needed to make that jump. I think like that, at least for technical writing, is like is a big deal.
You have that career note that I love, and at the beginning of it, you lay out this 3-step plan for impact. Can you explain that three-step plan? Or like, I feel like that's a good algorithm for people to use in their careers.
Step 1 is figure out what you really like to do, right? And as I mentioned, like it's good to broaden that, but it's also good to be honest with yourself, so you don't end up and like the quote, the hero quest that I went on that didn't pan out because I was working on stuff that I didn't really truly love. And then step 2 was figuring out what your employer is, what's really valuable to them, right? And as I talked about at Google, I didn't do a good job of that. I did stuff that I was really excited about, but it wasn't AdWords for Google or anything like that. Yeah, and then step 3 is like find that intersection and then just really lean into that. And the more that you can do that, I think the more successful you're going to be. And the challenge is sometimes it's not always there, right? And maybe you have to go find somewhere else to make that happen.
Okay, and then last question for you is, if you go back to yourself at the beginning of your career, knowing everything you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
I think I should have been open to learning more things sooner. And I to be a little gentle to myself, and I think other people are in that situation, is that there's so much to learn when you're starting. And then whatever your first programming language is, I think it's funny. I think everyone has a soft spot for it. They'll like make excuses for it for like ever. Like, oh, it's a totally good language. And I think it's because it's like the first thing that enabled you to do a thing, do anything, right? And then it's like, oh, okay, I can finally do something. It's such a relief. But it's also like a hazard because like then you kind of want to hold on to that thing because like you're finally productive, and now you're like, it took so long to get to this foothold. I don't know how long it's going to take to get to the next foothold. So I think like in my particular case, I probably went too deep with JavaScript, and like I said, it took a long time before I wrote NEC. And I think if I had been a little bit more curious and a little more flexible in terms of what like types of projects I was willing to take on or things I was willing to learn, it came eventually. But I think that is probably the biggest thing that maybe could have made a shift for me earlier.
Yeah, I gather from your story there was a point with the Xcode where you said you hated Objective-C,
Yeah.
and then you were coming up with like ways to compile the Objective-C into Java, or Java into Objective-C or something like that, maybe. And then also talking about the C++ for Miles, it was like it seemed like a very concerted, okay, I'm gonna learn this, as opposed to like just kind of being open to it. So yeah, it makes sense. Well, maybe with Codex in the future, it'll be less of a hurdle for people. You could just kind of say, hey, I know JavaScript, write this in Rust or whatever.
No, it's true. Opens a lot of doors for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Roy.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. It's a passion project of mine that I've really enjoyed building. Another passion project that I've been working on kind of in secret is building an ergonomic keyboard that I wish existed. And I finally have a prototype, so I'd love to show you what we've built. It's ultra low profile and ergonomic, and I couldn't find anything like it on the market. So that's why we built it. I'll put a link to the keyboard in the description. You can take a look and learn more about the project there. We could definitely use your support. Also, if you have any feedback for me about the show, I'd love to hear it. Comments on YouTube have led to guests coming on like 𝗪𝗶𝗺𝗀𝘀𝘁 and 𝗪𝗵𝗵𝗀𝗀𝘀. I wasn't aware of them until someone dropped a comment. Also, feedback in the comments helped me learn to reduce the number of cliffhangers in the intros. So your comments definitely make a difference. Please keep letting me know what you'd like to see more of in the show, and I'll see you in the next episode.